Hey everybody, how's it going? My name is Chris, this is my shop partner Oots, and today I'm doing a really special project. It's a cross for the church that I grew up in. It's got some cool hand-cut mitered bridle joints. It's going to be backlit by some LEDs. Should be a really fun project, so let's get started. I'm building this project out of a really nice piece of quarter sawn white oak. I take the board and cut it into 3 pieces on my miter saw, and then I rip them to width on my brand new table saw. This new saw has a 3 horsepower motor, and it made going through this 8/4 inch oak really easy. Next, I secure my piece to the workbench and begin removing the milling marks using a hand plane. I use a smoothing plane with a tightly set mouth as well as the chip breaker set really close to the cutting edge. With the blade well sharpened and the plane set up this way, I should be able to avoid any tear out when the grain changes direction. In this shot, I've already done a few passes and you can see how smooth the surface of the wood actually becomes. Now I will begin working on the miter ends of my 2 arms. On this first cut, I wanted to show the use of a straight edge as a guide. I clamp a 90-degree straight edge perfectly aligned with my 45-degree line and begin cutting. I make sure to keep the saw snug against the straight edge, and once I've established a nice deep saw curve, I can remove the straight edge and finish the cut. It is also possible to get a nice straight cut to your line without the use of a straight edge. I use my thumb to line up the saw on the far end of the cut. I start the saw and slowly and carefully I lower the heel of the saw so that it follows my line perfectly until I've established a saw curve all the way across the board. I try to keep my shoulder, elbow, and wrist all in line so that the saw will travel back and forth in a nice straight parallel line during each stroke. I concentrate on this alignment and always check my progress to make sure I'm still on track. If I do this, I can usually end up with a nice square straight cut. Then I'll take my pieces over to the vise and clean up the saw marks with the plane. I also make sure that the miters are nice and square and straight. Once both my pieces are done, I will mark and begin cutting away the waste out of the center of this bridle joint. I use my Japanese saw to cut each side away, but then I discovered I didn't really have a great way to remove that waste. I didn't really feel like chopping it all out with a chisel at the time, so I took it over to the bandsaw and let that do the work. After I removed most of the waste with the bandsaw, I still needed to come back with the chisel and square up that shoulder and do a little fine tuning. Next, I lay the cross out exactly the way I want it. I make sure everything is perfectly square and aligned, and I'll use a knife to mark out the exact areas that I need to cut. Using the same marking gauge as before, I'm able to mark out the depths in which I need to cut this half of the bridle joint. Using my chisel and mallet, I deepen the knife wall in several steps down to my final depth. Once I deepen my knife walls enough, I'll use my chisel coming in from the side to easily chop out the majority of the waste. Once I'm about a 1/16 from my final depth, I'll grab my homemade router plane, set its blade to the final depth, and remove the last bit of material. And hey, if you're liking the video and haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel, and if you hit the bell icon, you'll get notifications for when I put out a new video. Also, make sure to check out my website where you can find project plans, merchandise, and lists of the favorite tools that I use and recommend. And a very special thanks to my Patreon supporters. I really appreciate the support you guys give. And if you're interested in helping support this channel too, there's a link to my Patreon page as well as my website down in the description. Now I'm going to use my bandsaw again to add some tapers to the cross's center posts and arms. Then I'll take my number 6 hand plane and flatten those tapered edges and remove the bandsaw marks. Next, I'll add some simple chamfers to all the edges with a small black plane. I also decided to add a small chamfer to all the edges making up the bridle joint pieces. I thought this would be a nice touch and accentuate the joint a little bit more. I'm glad I did because I think this really helps the joint stand out once it's all put together. Then I add some glue to the joints and drive them all together. I throw some clamps on it and start working on the LED frame that will be attached between the wall and the cross. I decided to play around with my new table saw a little bit more, and I cut the half lap joints using that. I just raised my blade to half the distance of the 2x4 and sliced away until I've removed all the waste. Because my table saw's teeth are ground in an ATB or alternate top bevel configuration, it doesn't leave a nice smooth surface, so I'll just take my shoulder plane and flatten it out. Then on the bandsaw, I will cut tapers to match the tapers on the main cross. I'll then glue and screw the support frame together. I found this awesome color changing remote controlled LED strip at my local big box store. I'll use it to wrap the perimeter of the frame, and once it's mounted to the wall, it'll make a nice raised LED backlit effect. I screw in the little rubber brackets that were included with the kit, but then I also used some clear masking tape as well to hold in between the brackets because there weren't that many. Next, I marked out 5 locations and I'll make a series of keyholes using my router with a special keyhole bit. Then I drive in 5 panhead screws into the support frame, leaving them about a 1/2 inch proud. These 5 screws will line up perfectly with the keyholes that I made in the cross. To finish this cross, I use 3 coats of General Finishes Armor Seal. Now over at the church, I secure the support frame to the wall using some drywall anchors. And once I line the keyholes up in the cross, it drops into place beautifully.
There's little keyholes. You on the money. Here we go. Hey, what do you think, Linda?
It's gorgeous.
So good there? It is
Freaking
beautiful.
gorgeous.
Yeah,
Now,
it's cool.
now comes the fun part.
The grand finale.
OMG. Oh, Christopher,
Even.
he's gorgeous.
Oh, you're switching.
So there you have it. I think it turned out really beautiful. The LED backlighting really makes that cross stand out. I really hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks so much for watching, and see you next time.